Next on Max TV, we take a look at the return of the ghost Kelly Pavlik. We review Showbox, and we have news and notes. Coming up on the next round. And welcome to the next round, brought to you by Everlast, Steve, Kim, Gabriel Montoya. It is a windy day in Southern California, yet we wrap up the year of 2009. Let's get started with round number one. It was the return of the ghost in Youngstown State University for the middleweight championship of the world. Kelly Pavlik improves to 36-1. He notches his 32nd stoppage, stopping the tough Miguel Espino in 5 rounds. Junior middleweight prospect Vanes Monterroge is impressive in stopping Willie Lee in 3. And then in Mexico for the WBA interim bantamweight title, Nihomar Cermeño with the TKO in 11 over Alejandro Valdez. And then lightweight contender Humberto Soto, he beats Jesus Chavez over 10. Gabe, going back up top, Miguel Espino is who we thought he was, to quote Dennis Green. Tough, rugged, solid guy, yet limited, built to order for Kelly Pavlik.
Yeah, but, you can't measure heart, guts and will. And, you look back at that Kevin Johnson debacle against Vitaly Klitschko, and then you look at what Miguel Espino did, and I thought it was a beautiful thing. He went out there, he tasted Pavlik's power, said, you know what, I don't have much time in this fight, I can't eat many more of those, I'm just going to go for it. And, for the rest of his life, the guy can say, I fought for the middleweight title, and when I did, I gave it everything I had, outgunned, outmanned, outskilled. And still, I thought he gave a hell of a showing for himself.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Kevin Johnson ran for the hills of Switzerland, while Miguel Espino, as the old soldiers used to say, he died with his boots on and gave a valiant effort. And there's a reason why they chose him. They thought he was limited, he wasn't going to move, not hard to find. And really, I think the perfect comeback opponent for Kelly Pavlik, not only to notch a victory, score a knockout, but in large measure to regain his confidence.
I think that was huge for him, in this fight. He's not exactly like, you look at him and say, well, is he rusty or anything? Well, it's not like Kelly Pavlik ever moved around the ring like a butterfly. He kind of stands there. He had some nice subtle movement inside. I thought he blocked well and slipped some shots well. But this was, tailor-made for him. It was a guy that was going to come forward, was going to eventually be there for some sort of opening. But I thought, Pavlik looked good. He found that right to the body. He showed that he's a smart fighter still after all this time. And then he used the right uppercut, found that opening later on in the fight, found a little bit of distance in the 3rd round. If there was anything that was a criticism, was that he's still unsure about the left hand. I thought, he didn't snap that jab like he used to. It wasn't the telephone pole that had been in the past. And I think that just speaks to the injury that he had.
If you're Kelly Pavlik and you are allowed to fight like a locomotive in a straight line down the track, you're not made to reset your feet, lateral movement's not going to be a problem, and you stay in his wheelhouse. He is one of the very, very good offensive fighters in the game of boxing today. Miguel Espino did not pose that problem. No. But here's what I loved. Bob Arum, Jack Lowe, Cameron Duncan, and Kelly Pavlik threw down the gauntlet, and they told Paul Williams, George Peterson, and Dan Goosen, in the words of Bob Arum, you got a whole year. Initial the contract. Let's make the fight. You know what? I say Paul Williams is still a tough matchup, but I love the chutzpah and I love the hubris of saying, you know what? We're sick of the talk. We're sick of the trash talk. We're sick of the lies and rumors. Let's get the fight on. Put your name on the dotted line.
I'd love to see that, man. I wish we could see more of that in boxing. What I loved was that he said, look, either sign the contract or just shut up. I mean, the bottom line is that these guys are advertising themselves as the most feared fighter in the sport. Paul Williams is, and his promoters are promoting him that way, based on Kelly Pavlik's legitimate injury. And that's not really fair. I think that's very negative campaigning. And here it is. Goosen kind of responded and said, well, we have different demands now, and Paul Williams just fought in a Fight of the Year candidate, and this and that. But the bottom line is that Paul doesn't sell any more tickets than he did before that fight. He's not a huge draw. It was already hard enough to get terms agreed to in this fight. Let's just make it happen. It's good for the sport. It's good for both fighters. Where else are either of these guys going to go?
Yeah, and Dan Goosen's not even talking about a Sergio Martinez rematch. He's talking about Bernard Hopkins, which has been shot down by Golden Boy Promotions and Richard Schaefer. I think this fight needs to be made. I think it's gotten very, very personal, which I personally love. I think it adds to the drama of the fight. I think it's a more sellable fight now. But if Dan Goosen really believes he's going to bully them in the 50-50 after fighting in a small ballroom the fight before, I don't think that's going to happen. But Pavlik Williams now was a curiosity in 2009. I think in 2010, it's one of those must-see fights below the Pacquiao-Mayweather radar.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the style matchup is great. You got a classic kind of boxer, but who's also a bit of a fighter in Paul Williams, and then you've got the pure kind of puncher boxer in Kelly Pavlik. And now it's personal, like you said. These guys don't like each other. And Williams has shown, against Martinez that he doesn't have the best chin as he's moving up in weight. He can be dropped. And if Martinez can drop him, I think Kelly Pavlik can knock him out late.
And I think you have a natural undercard. You have Bob Arum against Dan Goossen, Cameron Duncan against Al Heyman, then you have George Peterson against Jack Lowe. No need for Yuri Borman in this instance. Talking about Vanes Martirosyan, here's a guy that I still felt fought like an amateur. But you know what? I think he's turning into a pro, starting to set his feet, starting to fight into the pocket. Yeah, I know he only fought Willie Lee, but instead of sticking it out to a 10-12 round decision, blew him out, made the statement he needed.
Sometimes it's not who you're fighting, but, how you fight them. And he went out there and he did his job against Willie Lee. I think since he's left, when he was with Ronnie Shields, he seemed to get lackadaisical. He'd kind of lost focus as a fighter. He lost his identity, really, as a fighter. But since he's returned to the wild card in these last few fights, he's become very aggressive. The combination punching is there. The pinpoint accuracy is there. And just his confidence overall, he's just oozing it. He walks out there like he's a world champion or a world, championship contender. And he's just getting better and better every time. But in 2010, I think it's time to, get rid of the Willie Lees of the world and start fighting some real fighters.
Now, Gabe, I've said this throughout the last couple of years. No matter who we had as a trainer, there was one constant: top rank. The matchmaking staff of Bruce Trampler and Brad Goodman.
Yeah.
And I've always said and maintained, they develop fighters and nurture them better than anyone. And you see the progress once again with Vanes Martirosyan, that they have a way of not looking at the trees, but really through the forest, and kind of guiding a fighter and really nurturing him through the big picture. Now you're seeing a guy ready to compete at the world-class level at 154. And speaking of a guy going out on his boots, Jesus Chavez, he fought dirty. He fought like Fritzy Zivic. He bent all the Queensberry rules. But if this is his last fight, I know he lost in a lopsided fashion, but you know what, Gabe? I thought he gave a hell of a account of himself. He made life difficult for Humberto Soto. He was there to win. And I tell you what, he died with his boots on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Soto's going to be thinking about him for a long time.
It won't be good thoughts, by the way.
No, it won't. That bastard threw me through the ropes, hit him. One of the worst low blows I've ever seen.
That was in Guadalajara.
Yeah, definitely. It was almost like as if Trinidad, that first left hook that landed on Vargas, had gone about a couple feet lower. He caught all of it. But, I thought Soto, the problem with him is that I don't think he brought his power up to 135. Yeah. He looks like he hits strong, but not, devastatingly hard. And I think it's going to be a problem fighting the Valeros and the DeMarcos.
I don't remember the last time I saw Humberto Soto back up so much and play the role of the guy that was on the ropes. And I think he needs to go back to 130 in a fight I'd like to see next year is a fight that was discussed middle part of last year, Robert Guerrero, the new IBF 130-pound titleist. I think that's a good fight. But I agree with you. There's a guy who can move up in certain instances, but then really loses a lot of effect. That the strength and the power was not there at 135 like we saw at junior lightweight.
Yeah, particularly the strength. I mean, I thought he had snap on his punches. I thought he looked solid, but the bull rush of Jesus Chavez just kept him retreating the whole time, and he was never able to get that kind of come forward leverage. And that's what he needs to be effective. And he's not going to be a mover. He's going to turn into Joan Guzman and lose all his power and kind of stink out the joint. I agree with you. I think 130 is his ceiling. That's where he's best, and Guerrero Soto will be an amazing fight.
All right, well, that's it for the Return to the Ghost. We come back, we take a look at Showbox. And we're back on the next round. Steve Kim, Gabriel Montoya. We move on to round number 2. It was Showbox from Hinckley, Minnesota. Middleweights in action. Fernando Guerrero stops Jesse Nicolas in 4. Junior middleweight prospect Sean Porter remains undefeated, stopping Jamar Patterson in 4. Then welterweight Leonard Lane, the TKO in 2 over Saeed El Harak. Going back up top, Fernando Guerrero, I don't know how good he is. I know he's a great ticket seller out there in Maryland. Rugged, tough guy. But I thought he looked pretty good, though, against Jesse Nicolas, doing what he's supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, I think his feet are kind of slow and a little bit awkward. But I loved his defense. He covers up really well. I loved his economy in terms of his arsenal. He just kind of moved forward. He waited for his spots. He picked his shots. I think his power is pretty legitimate. I mean, he seems like a solid guy, and I'd like to see him step up in the next year.
Yeah, and he has a very good trainer in Barry Hunter, who does a great job of nurturing young talent out of that Washington, D.C., Maryland area. Sean Porter is a guy that we're very familiar with. First time I saw him without headgear, small gloves. Here's what I think. Does need to go down to 147.
Yeah.
Looking at the stature, does not look like right now he can compete at the highest levels of 154. Also, a lot of physical tools, quickness, speed, and some power. However, like we talked about with Vanes Martirosyan, still more of an amateur right now at this stage than a professional.
Well, he's a trip. I've never seen a guy. He gets in close and he'll throw 3 or 4 lefts in a row and then a bunch of rights. It is kind of amateur, but it's almost very kind of Pacquiao-esque in a sense. He just constantly throws punches. He's moving from strange angles. He bounces in and out. Even if he stays at 154, he's going to be a little puzzle to solve because he's so small and quick, and he's definitely strong and powerful. But I think like a James Kirkland fight with him down the line would be a hell of a fight. But I agree with you. I think he should move down to 147. He doesn't really have to stretch himself to the limits right now of his abilities. I think 147 would be a nice weight.
Yeah, Sean Porter's a very good athlete. They need to harness some of that speed and that quickness. As John Wooden likes to say, be quick, but don't be in a hurry. And the guy that really burst out of the scene, and a guy that I'd heard a little bit about out of H-Town, but a guy that no one really knew, and everyone thought this would be a 50-50 fight. But Leonard Lane just blew out Harak, who had been a sparring partner for some pretty good fighters out here. The bottom line is Harak, for a tall fighter, could not establish distance, was getting hit with clean right hands, and after that first knockdown, literally the fight was over at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like coming into the fight that Harak was the guy that with a little more experience, that had had fought a little bit tougher guys on the pro level, but he was just no match for Lane, who fought great at distance, and that power, in my opinion, is definitely for real.
There weren't any great fights, though, but I thought we saw some very good young talent. And this is why I love Showbox. No, there was no Fight of the Years on, but without this series, especially with Friday Night Fights taking a hiatus all throughout the winter and fall, this is why I think right now the Showbox is the most important developmental tool for any young fighter in the sport today.
I would agree. I mean, it's what Boxing After Dark used to be.
Yeah.
It's what Friday Night Fights should be. These are all evenly matched fights, or at least, these are guys that, like the Harak and the Lane fight, 2 guys that are undefeated, that are meeting, and we're going to find out which of these guys is for real. And more often than not, we get an all-action fight and an explosive ending. I love that series.
And you have to give Gordon Hall a lot of credit at Showtime, who is the producer of this show. He picks the matches, finds out the young talent. You look at the list of champions from 2001 till now that have been developed on this series. It truly is an epic list of prize fighters. Well, that's it for Showbox. We come back. We wrap it up with news and notes. Moving on to news and notes, Gabriel Montoya, Steve Kim, wrapping it up here on the next round. We go to news and notes. Fight review from Mexico. IBF featherweight title with a technical draw as they clashed heads, Cristobal Cruz and Ricardo Castillo. Then from Venezuela, still the WBC lightweight champion is Edwin Valero, stopping Hector Velasquez after 6. You got to see this fight. I'm getting my DVD. Yes or no? Is Edwin Valero getting better or worse?
I think he's getting worse. As much as I like the guy, he's got a great personality. I think he's got star potential. He's an explosive style, and I'm a sucker for a southpaw, especially with two-fisted power. He looks slower this time. He looks sloppier. Really, from the first moment, he threw a 1-2 and it turned into a clinch. I thought, oh God, we're in for an ugly night. But that power is the great equalizer, and he basically beat the guy down until he couldn't come out anymore.
Yeah, he's one of these guys. He's stagnated. His development really has just kind of flatlined after about the 15 first-round knockouts he had. Actually, more to begin with. Here's the thing. I don't know who's training him outside of Edwin Valero. He had a world-class guy in Kenny Adams. I'm not even so sure Robert Alcazar worked with him this fight. You know more than I would.
Yeah, I don't think he did.
But he was with Joe Hernandez at the beginning, made a lot of progress. And people will tell you that don't have a horse in this race. They think he looked better in his first 10 to 12 fights out here in L.A. than he has in his last 10 fights at the world-class level. Yeah. That alarms me. And here's another thing. I thought to me that he came out of the gate really quick. My old colleague Doug Fisher gave him a lot of hype, had a lot of internet buzz, and he became this sensation. Won his title, I guess, against Vicente Mosquera in an absolute back-and-forth war. He's gotten to the world-class level. He signed a big deal with Top Rank. But then, since that point on, everything that you hear about Valero is not good. DUIs, tattoos of dictators on his chest while he's trying to come into America. Not the smartest thing in the world. Promotional difficulties where Top Rank, they're not going to admit it, but internally, they're wondering if they wasted a lot of money. And I have to say, at this stage of his career, Hector Velasquez is like your first or second title defense. I hate to say it, Hector Velasquez was a tough guy about 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
He should have been a developmental fighter, not a guy you fight defending your title, which says a lot about the way his career is moving.
Yeah, I mean, the two best fights on Valero's resume are Antonio Pitalua and Vincent Mosquero. That's it. There should have been a progression past this point. And, looking into the February 6th when he has this showdown with Antonio DeMarco, I have to think that DeMarco is actually going to be the favorite in that fight.
Whoa, wait a minute. You're going that far.
Boxing skills, to me, watching DeMarco develop, it looks like they saw the Valero fight on the horizon and have built towards that moment and have prepared for that moment. And from a technical standpoint, from a skills standpoint, and what he's shown me on the world-class level, I kind of lean towards DeMarco in that fight.
If DeMarco fought more like a stinking tall southpaw like he should, but doesn't, I would pick him. Problem with DeMarco, he's got too much of this for his own good.
Yeah.
But going down the line, let's say he beats DeMarco, he's going to be at 135, and there are big names out there still. The problem is, if you cannot fight in the United States of America, it is hard to make money. You can fight a DeMarco in Mexico, but if you want to lure any of the other big names at 135, fights in Monterrey and Cancun simply really are not really a realistic option.
I think would be a great fight for him if you could get him back down to 135 would be Juan Diaz. You could kind of do it, maybe border town, or you could do it in Mexico. All the Texas fans would move on over, and that'd be a very big fight.
Well, remember, Valero can't fight in one state, Texas. So that is maybe a natural promotion that can be made. Taking a look at some tidbits as we wrap it up here. Sergio, Mora, and Nate Campbell have signed promotional deals with Golden Boy Promotions, and Top Rank inks a new deal with Fox Sports Net and Espanol. Mora is going to be fighting January 30th against Jason Nogler. I got to tell you about Sergio Mora. He better get on the horse and he better start riding. He has a very, very inflated view of himself. I like Sergio, but he has to understand. I looked at the calendar, Gabe. It's a lot closer to 2010 than it is to 2005. It's been a long time since the NBC showed the contender.
It's been a long time since he's been a fighter that really mattered on the landscape. And that's, I think, his fault in a lot of ways. He turned down the Jermaine Taylor fight. I don't know what happened with the Kelly Pavlik fight, but he's not really a relevant fighter at this time. And he doesn't really have a pleasing TV style. He doesn't have a lot of power. I don't even know about his drawing power at this point. So, at this point, it's last chance saloon. You got to fight early and often and make a last run at this.
As they say, out of sight, out of mind, and that has been the Latin snake. As for Nate Campbell, I get the sense that Golden Boy signed him to be cannon fodder, or at least insurance that if we're going to match him up against some of our guys between 135 and 140, just in case you pull off another Juan Diaz or Kid Diamond type of upset, you're in our fold.
Yeah, I think that's somebody that they could feed to, Victor Ortiz. Mm-hmm. That's a hell of a developmental fight, but, Nate's going to be outgunned. He's getting old. The legs are starting to show, their age. That's basically, what they brought him along for. In a lot of ways how I felt about them signing Juan Manuel Marquez, and we saw them feed him to Floyd Mayweather. So, yeah, why wouldn't they do it to Nate Campbell?
Here's the thing. I've heard that Amir Khan is looking around. Amir Khan is already back in L.A. He's been talking to promoters. Frank Warren looks like it might be losing another marquee fighter in the name of Joe Calzaghe, Ricky Hatton, Prince Nassim Ahmed. One of the rumors out there is that if Amir Khan goes the Golden Boy, he could be fighting March 6th. One of the names being mentioned is Nate Campbell. And here's the thing, Gabe. I like Top Rank. I'm glad there's more boxing on. But after what Top Rank did to Versus and how poorly executed TV Azteca was, you want to talk about last chance saloon. If I am a network, and if they botch this up, and from what I understand, I've reported this before, hinted at it, it's been official now, 3 shows every month, one will be on Fox Sports Net, there's going to be pretty good money here. I got to tell you, Top Rank is a great company, but with the way they've handled their last couple of TV deals, really does not speak well of that company.
Yeah, it almost seems like if we put it on TV, fight fans will find it. Like we're going to program it into our TiVo and it'll magically show up. Because I tell you, I couldn't find any of their shows this year. It would show up on the programming. I'd tape it and it'd be soccer.
You get soccer.
And I don't like soccer. I like boxing. So hopefully this year they'll kind of clean up that ship and we'll get some more shows. Because Top Rank's got a great stable of fighters. They develop fighters like no other promoter in the world. But I need to see the fights for that to be actually an exciting thing.
And Gabe, unfortunately, some late news here. It looks like it's going to happen. MGM Grand is going to land March 13th, Pacquiao Mayweather. The bottom line is I think they're getting the minimum out of the maximum. I think it's sad. I think they are minimizing the impact of this fight. The bottom line is this. This is not about advancing boxing. Don't let them tell you this. This is about 6 or 7 select people making a lot of money. And I feel sorry for you fans out there that were willing to make the trek, because the bottom line is, even if you could afford it, if you're not a high roller or in the know, you can't even buy tickets at face value.
Yeah.
Bottom line is it's a scam, and Vegas, to me, was the worst place to put this fight if you wanted to spread the word and the gospel of this great sport.
Yeah, you don't need Vegas to make this a glitzy, high-profile fight. This fight could be on Pluto, and it would do very well. You know, for them to take it away from the fans like this, we're the ones. You know, well, we're riders, but we're also fans at the bottom of it. But the fans out there that made those million pay-per-views for Mayweather, Marquez, and have sold all the Manny Pacquiao fights. Those are the ones that made this possible. And I think it's a slap in the face to, as Bob Arum would call them, all those schmucks out there.
Those schmucks.
You know, to take this fight away from them. You know, I'm a little happy just because I'm not going to have to drive that far for Vegas. But you know, I was going to be there regardless of where it was going to be.
Another issue that I think is an abomination. I just love the way Vegas is. We're going to put out 40,000 closed circuit seats at $100. Wait, as that old song from Aretha Franklin, Who Zoom and Who? Are they kidding me? Are you out of your mind? That to me is a crime. It's bad enough that you're telling people to travel down there. It costs a little money, gas or airfare. You got to stay there at the hotel, and they're already jacked up the hotel room because I've checked. Now, instead of going $50 to $60, they're charging you $100 for a closed circuit. There should be an investigation, not into any wrongdoing, but to abject stupidity.
Yeah,
it's an insult to the public.
It really is. I mean, instead of boxing, they always do this to themselves. You know, we had this great moment. I mean, this is on ESPN. People are talking about it. I mean, Manny Pacquiao is so in the mainstream, he's now a verb. You know, and what do? They take it away from the fans. They put it in Vegas where nobody, you know, other than high rollers are going to be able to see it. We're not going to show up for the undercard. They're going to probably charge $75 for a pay-per-view and $100 for closed circuit. But nobody likes to shoot itself in the foot quite like boxing does.
This is becoming more a business deal instead of a boxing match.
Yeah.
I'm getting that sense that either side, by the time they sign the contract, they don't care if they win or lose, really. And the thing that gets me is it's the only sport, boxing, that would say, instead of putting it in a world-class $1.2 billion venue where we could draw 80 to 100,000 fans, let's go to this antiquated room at the MGM Grand and only let 16.5 join in on the fun with no real pre-sale to the public. I think, to me, that is so wrong on so many levels.
Yeah, it's like doing the Super Bowl at a high school, but just charging a bunch of money for the tickets and hoping to do well that way. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. All right, when we come back, our next show next week, we're going to be dressed exactly the same. That's just a coincidence. Will be the year-end review. So till the next round, on behalf of Gabriel Montoya and the rest of Max Boxing, goodbye, everybody.